Hello, friends. Today we have a special story that will make you think about fairness and equality in the work environment. Imagine, you are a talented and hard-working lawyer who has achieved significant professional success with great difficulty, but despite all your efforts and achievements, you were denied a well-deserved promotion. In our story, that's exactly what happened. The main character, a black lawyer with outstanding skills and achievements, faced an injustice that shook her to the core. And how did she decide to deal with it? She didn't stay silent or give up. Instead, she decided to take matters into her own hands and arrange a meeting with her boss. What happened at that meeting? How did she shock her boss and get justice? Stay tuned to find out all the details of this exciting story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new inspiring and important videos. After being passed over for a promotion, Laura, our heroine, couldn't believe what had happened. She knew her accomplishments spoke for themselves, several won cases, recognition from colleagues and clients, and even high marks in her most recent performance reviews. But despite this, she faced a barrier that seemed insurmountable. Laura thought long and hard about her next move. She knew that her experience and skills were being undervalued, and that this was not only unfair but also contrary to the values she believed in. Rather than give in to disappointment, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She had prepared a thorough justification for her candidacy for the promotion. In this document, she had compiled all of her accomplishments, backed them up with facts and figures, and added testimonials from clients and colleagues. But her preparation didn't stop there. Laura had carefully thought through every possible scenario for the meeting, preparing for any objections her boss might raise. When the day of the meeting arrived, she walked into her boss's office with a determined expression on her face. She had a carefully prepared package of documents in her hands. The boss was surprised to see her, as such meetings were usually scheduled in advance. Laura sat down in front of his desk and began to present her position. She talked about how long and hard she had worked to achieve her current results. Each success was supported by specific examples, and she did not leave any aspect of her work unattended. Laura also drew attention to recent changes in the company, which, in her opinion, had a negative impact on the objectivity of her performance evaluation. The boss, listening to her, noticed that her confidence and determination were simply undeniable. He probably did not expect such depth of analysis and precision in her arguments. Laura not only presented her achievements, but also showed how her promotion would not only reward her work, but also benefit the company as a whole. At the end of her presentation, the room was silent. The boss paused, not expecting such a turn of events. He understood that Laura had not simply applied for a promotion, but had done so with a level of professionalism that could not go unnoticed. A few days after the meeting, Laura received a formal promotion offer, but her story didn't end there. She continued to fight for the company to adopt more transparent and fair performance evaluation criteria, and her experience became an example for others who faced similar challenges. Her determination and courage inspired many of her colleagues, and her story spread throughout the company, sparking conversations about the need for changes in corporate culture. Laura became not only a successful lawyer, but also a symbol of the fight for fairness and equality in the workplace. That's how the story ended, but its lessons remain relevant today. If you believe in yourself and are willing to fight for your rights, you can achieve great things, no matter the obstacles. When Laura received an offer for a promotion, the joy and satisfaction of winning were overcome by a new problem. Not everyone in the company welcomed her success. A wave of resentment and envy began to spread within the team. It was said that her promotion was the result of manipulation and pressure, and that she got the position not on merit, but thanks to her persistence. Laura noticed that her colleagues were becoming wary and even hostile towards her. People at work began to avoid her, and former friends began to criticize her. It was difficult to work in such conditions, and Laura felt that her professional success had turned into personal isolation. Her boss, seeing the tension in the team, began to have doubts about the correctness of his decision. He began to frequently subject Laura to additional testing, which created even more stress. Against the backdrop of all these difficulties, Laura began to doubt her choice and even wondered whether it was worth continuing to fight for her place in the company. At this point, a new development occurred that further complicated the situation. One of her senior colleagues, jealous of her success, decides to act under duress. He begins spreading rumors that Laura is allegedly using her connections to manipulate the system and gain undeserved privileges. These rumors begin to spread throughout the company, and her reputation begins to deteriorate. The situation escalated when Laura found that her own projects and achievements were beginning to be undermined. Some important projects she had been working on were beginning to drag on and were subject to unnecessary scrutiny. At this time, she had to fight not only for her place, but also to restore her reputation. Laura decides that she will not just sit idly by. She begins to gather evidence against those who spread false rumors and turns to allies within the company for support. She also asks senior management to conduct an independent investigation into her case. This step requires great courage, but Laura knows that without it she will not be able to restore justice. When the investigation began, an external auditor came to the company. Laura provided all the necessary materials and evidence of her innocence. The top management carefully examined all the facts and came to the conclusion that the accusations against her were unfounded. The investigation confirmed her professionalism and honesty. As a result, not only was Laura exonerated, but the process itself became a catalyst for change in the corporate culture. The company took steps to improve its employee evaluation system and combat bias. Having overcome all the difficulties, Laura returned to her work with renewed strength and the support of her colleagues who saw her true value. She continued her achievements, and her story became not only an example of the fight for justice, but also a lesson on the importance of perseverance in difficult times and believing in yourself. Laura's story ultimately ended in victory, but her journey was full of dramatic moments that made her success even more meaningful and inspiring. Once Laura had regained stability at work and regained her position, it seemed that all the difficulties were behind her. Her decision to conduct an independent investigation was approved by senior management, and she became a symbol of overcoming difficulties and fighting for justice in the company. But it was at this moment that an unexpected turn occurred that changed everything. One evening, as Laura was returning home after a long day at work, she was interrupted by a strange call. On the other end of the line was an unknown voice who, without further ado, announced that he had information about her case that could shock her. Laura, wasting no time, wrote down the number and decided that she needed to find out what was behind this warning. The next day, when she came to the office, she found that her computer and some important documents were missing. At first, she thought it was just a mistake or a technical problem, but when she discovered that her work laptop had been stolen, she realized that it could be related to her case. Laura decided to go to the police and report the theft, but she was not sure that this would solve the problem. While the investigation was ongoing, Laura began receiving anonymous letters with threatening content, saying that her actions to restore justice would not go unpunished. Each letter contained details of her personal life that could lead one to believe that someone very close was spying on her. One day, while Laura was in her apartment, she received a call from her colleague, James, who worked in the finance department. He said that he had found suspicious transactions on the company card and that he thought these transactions might be related to her case. Laura was shocked. If this was true, then someone from the company might be involved in what was happening. Laura's next move was a risky one. She decided to meet James at a cafe to discuss the situation. At the meeting, he handed her a flash drive containing documents he had found. These documents detailed a scheme involving financial abuse and accounting fraud. In addition, James revealed that these schemes could be linked to her opponents who were unhappy with her career advancement. When Laura began digging through the documents, she stumbled upon shocking information. Several high-profile employees of the company, including her former boss, were involved in an elaborate fraud scheme aimed at sabotaging her work and discrediting her achievements. They used their power to manipulate financial flows and falsify reports in order to derail Laura and prevent her from getting promoted. Laura decided to take action. She approached senior management again, presenting the evidence she had gathered. This triggered a large-scale internal investigation that uncovered deep corruption patterns within the company. As a result, several high-profile employees, including her former boss, were fired and held accountable. But the story didn't end there. During her investigation, Laura discovered that her anonymous informant was one of her old colleagues who was concerned about what was happening and wanted to help, but was afraid to act openly. This person turned out to be one of those who helped her avoid many setups and supported her during difficult times. The end of this story became a new beginning for Laura. With her position restored and her reputation cleared, she decided to dedicate herself to reforms in the company. working to improve the corporate culture and prevent similar abuses in the future. Her fight for justice was not only a personal victory for her, but also the beginning of a new era of honesty and transparency in the company. Laura has proven that fortitude and perseverance can overcome any obstacle, and although her path was full of surprises and dramatic turns, her determination and courage helped her not only restore justice, but also change the system for the better. After Laura exposed the corruption in the company and regained her position, her life began to improve. She regained the respect of her colleagues and was recognized for her achievements. However, an inner sense of unease did not leave her. The danger she faced had left its mark, and Laura knew that her story might not be over yet. One morning, when Laura arrived at work, she found that her office had been broken into. Documents were scattered across the floor and her computer was damaged. Questions immediately arose. Who could have done this and why? Her old fears of retaliation and possible threat became relevant again. Laura decided not to leave it to chance. She turned to a private detective who had previously helped her with the investigation. Together, they began analyzing surveillance footage and finding out who might have been involved in the incident. During the investigation, it was discovered that the hacking was organized to steal new evidence that Laura was collecting for further investigation. At this time, new unexpected events began. Laura began receiving messages from a mysterious sender who claimed to have information about a plot against her. These messages were full of threats and hints that her life could be in danger. Laura could not ignore this and decided to take security measures by hiring security and changing her habits. Several weeks passed, and one day, returning home late at night, Laura noticed that she was being followed. She felt that her life was again under threat, and this was confirmed when her car was stopped on the road. Alarmed, she managed to slip away, but the incident further strengthened her suspicions that she had stumbled upon dangerous forces. In search of the truth, Laura decided to turn to people who might know about the company's internal policies. She began meeting with former colleagues and employees who might be involved in secret schemes. During the investigation, she learned about the existence of an underground group in the company that was involved in manipulating and falsifying not only financial data, but also internal information. This group was deeply embedded in the company's structure and could pose a serious threat. One day, during a meeting with an informant, Laura learned of the group's plans to organize a new plot to discredit her in front of the leadership. The informant revealed that the group's leaders planned to falsify documents and accuse Laura of financial fraud in order to finally eliminate her as a threat. Laura realized that she had to act quickly and decisively. She gathered all her evidence and presented it to law enforcement, adding information about the conspiracy and threats to her life. This attracted the attention of the authorities, and a large-scale investigation began, which led to the arrest of key figures in the underground group. During the investigation, it was discovered that the group used high positions in the company to manipulate and control the flow of information. They engaged in bribery and blackmail to maintain their influence and eliminate those who interfered with them. When the investigation was over, Laura was found not guilty and her reputation was completely restored. Stability returned to the company, and Laura, although tired of the struggle, felt that her efforts had not been in vain. She continued to work to improve the corporate culture and fight corruption. Laura's story became an important lesson in how to fight for truth and justice. Despite all obstacles, her determination and courage became an inspiration to many, and her name entered corporate history as a symbol of perseverance and uncompromising struggle for one's rights. After dismantling the underground group and restoring its reputation, Laura thought the hardest part was behind her. However, even in moments when it seems like everything is going well, life can throw up new challenges. It had been several months since Laura had regained her peace at work, and she was actively involved in developing new corporate standards and procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future. Everything seemed to be going well, but she always felt like something was wrong. One day, Laura received an unexpected letter. It contained information indicating serious mistakes in her personal life that could be used against her. The letter claimed that someone was monitoring her activities and collecting compromising materials. Laura was shocked. Who could know about her personal life and why was this done? With all this stress, she found it especially difficult to maintain a work-life balance. The surveillance, threats, and constant anxiety began to take a toll on her emotional state. Laura noticed that her concentration at work was diminished and she began to experience insomnia. Her personal life also came under pressure. Laura began to distance herself from her close friends and family, not wanting to bother them with her problems. Her relationship with her partner began to deteriorate, adding further stress. They discussed breaking up, and each discussion became more and more painful. While Laura struggled with internal and external problems, to her surprise, she found an ally in the most unexpected places. One of her colleagues, Rachel, turned out to be an old friend of her family. She was aware of the difficulties that Laura was going through and offered her support and help. Rachel, caught in the middle of the events, discovered that Laura may have become a victim of a larger conspiracy that she did not even know about. Rachel soon discovered that the threatening letters and surveillance were part of a plan to blackmail Laura and her loved ones. These actions, it turns out, were orchestrated by the remaining members of the underground group, who had not accepted defeat and wanted revenge. They planned to exploit Laura's personal and professional weaknesses to ruin her life completely. Laura, realizing she couldn't do it alone, turned to Rachel and her law enforcement connections for help. Together, they began tracking the source of the threats and collecting evidence. Laura and Rachel used their connections to discover a secret apartment where incriminating material was stored. During one of these investigations, Laura and Rachel were in real danger. They were trapped by the remaining members of the group who were trying to stop them. As a result of the dangerous encounter, Laura and Rachel narrowly escaped serious injuries. This incident became a painful reminder for Laura of how dangerous and determined her enemies were. With Rachel's help and the efforts of law enforcement, the remaining members of the group were uncovered and apprehended. They were held accountable for their actions and found guilty of numerous crimes. The uncovering of this network of shady dealings led to further changes in the corporate structure aimed at ensuring greater transparency and security. Meanwhile, Laura, having endured many personal and professional difficulties, began to slowly recover. Her relationships with her partner and loved ones began to mend. Although the process was long and difficult, Laura realized that her success was not only in fighting corruption, but also in finding support and love in difficult times. Laura's story is over, but its lessons remain relevant. She learned to cope with adversity and find strength in herself and those who support her. Her journey has become not only an example of fighting for the truth, but also an important reminder that true strength lies in the ability to overcome challenges and find balance between work and personal life. After Laura and Rachel successfully exposed the remaining members of the underground group and restored legitimacy to the company, they decided that it was important to not only deal with current threats, but also prevent future problems. Laura became even more determined in her mission to improve the company culture and ensure protection for all employees. Now that everything seemed stable, Laura focused on developing a new project that would serve as a model of corporate integrity and transparency. She proposed the creation of an independent ethics committee that would review and investigate possible abuses in the company. This project attracted a lot of interest and support from colleagues and senior management. However, as is often the case, calm can be deceptive. Laura noticed that despite the visible successes, new forms of discontent were beginning to emerge in the company. Although official data showed an increase in productivity and employee satisfaction, unofficial conversations and rumors pointed to hidden tensions. One day, during a meeting with members of the ethics committee, Laura received an anonymous letter containing threatening statements. It said that her efforts to improve the company threatened the interests of powerful people who still had influence inside and outside the corporation. The letter contained hints that someone high up might be willing to go to extreme measures to maintain their position and power. Since Laura and her team couldn't ignore the threats, she decided to conduct her own investigation. Together with Rachel and a few trusted employees, she began to study possible sources of threats and identify who might have an interest in her failure. They discovered that there was a group within the company that manipulated internal data and finances, but this group turned out to be much more dangerous than they had assumed. One evening, when Laura returned home, she was in for another shock. Her apartment had been robbed. Not only were valuables missing, but also personal documents. This was clearly a warning that she had better retreat. Laura began to fear for her safety and the safety of her loved ones. She decided to increase security and take precautions, but the tension and fear went far beyond her comfort level. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen within the company. There were unexpected changes in plans and finances, and some important projects began to encounter problems that had previously seemed unlikely. Laura began to suspect that this might be the result of subversive activity. One of the most alarming developments was the discovery of fraudulent financial reports that could have serious consequences for the company. Laura and her team found that someone at the highest levels of the company was actively working to create false data and manipulate financial flows. These actions could lead to a corporate crisis and even litigation. In the midst of these events, Rachel was able to find a connection between the fake reports and several high-profile members of the company who had previously attempted to cover up their actions. They discovered that this group was intentionally trying to create chaos to distract attention from their own machinations and try to cover their tracks. With the help of the evidence collected and the efforts of law enforcement, Laura was able to achieve a new wave of investigations. These efforts led to the arrest of several key figures, and a large-scale audit of all financial transactions of the company began. During the trial, it turned out that behind all these manipulations was a group that used complex schemes to evade taxes and manipulate the company shares. At the same time, Laura continued to face personal difficulties. Her relationship with her partner could not withstand the constant stress and pressure, and they broke up. This loss was a heavy blow, but Laura did not allow it to break her. She continued to work to restore justice and implement new standards in the company. Eventually, the crisis was overcome, and Laura was able to focus on positive changes again. She initiated new trainings for employees aimed at strengthening corporate ethics and preventing corruption. The company began to recover, and its new reputation as a leader of honesty and openness attracted positive media and public attention. Laura's story, full of struggle, drama, and personal challenges, became an important example of how a person can overcome significant obstacles and use their difficulties as a catalyst for positive change. Her journey inspired many to fight for justice, and her name became a symbol of strength, resilience, and perseverance in difficult times. Once Laura had rebuilt the company's processes and established new standards of ethics and transparency, she thought the hardest times were behind her. But a new, unexpected turn of events was on the horizon, which once again put her to the test. A few months later, Laura began to notice strange things: unauthorized attempts to access her work computer, important information disappearing from corporate systems, and suspicious activity in her bank accounts. She was sure that these actions were related to her previous cases, and decided to investigate further. One night, while Laura was working late in her office, she noticed that her computer had started turning on and off by itself. She immediately realized that this might be a sign of a hack. Laura contacted her IT specialists, who confirmed her fears. Her systems had been compromised, and unknown individuals had access to sensitive information. Shortly after, Laura received a message from an unknown source. The message stated that if she did not give up her plans to reform the company, her life and the lives of her loved ones would be in danger. The letter contained threats and examples of how her family and friends would be affected. Laura felt that the threats were serious and that someone was deliberately trying to intimidate her. Not wanting to give in to fear, Laura decided to seek help from highly qualified security specialists. They conducted a full audit of her systems and found that professional hackers were behind the attacks. Hired by the same people as before, the hackers used sophisticated methods to hide their tracks and hack, which required all the focus and expertise from Laura and her team. As Laura and her team investigated, they discovered that these attacks were linked to a larger organization that was waging psychological warfare against her, attempting to undermine her self-confidence and her reputation. The organization was linked to an international crime syndicate that used corruption and manipulation to achieve its goals. Meanwhile, Laura began to notice that her personal life was becoming a target again. New difficulties appeared in her life. Her loved ones began to receive strange calls and messages. Her home was surrounded by mysterious people. This created additional tension and increased her feelings of isolation. However, amidst all the difficulties, Laura found support in the most unexpected places. One of her old colleagues, who had previously been her adversary, came to her with an offer of help. This man, who turned out to be honest and decent, revealed that he had also been a victim of manipulation by the same organization and decided to help Laura expose it. With her new ally and a team of security specialists, Laura began to formulate a plan to take down the syndicate. She decided to conduct a strategic operation to gather evidence and expose the organization. It was a dangerous undertaking that required courage and caution, but Laura was determined. The plan involved sting operations and real-time evidence gathering, which was risky and required precise coordination. Laura and her team used their resources to create false trails and infiltrate the syndicate. They were able to uncover important details about the organization's activities and identify key members of the syndicate. The operation took an unexpected turn. One of the syndicate's key players turned out to have shocking connections to the company where Laura worked. This person had access to the highest levels of management and used his influence to manipulate the situation. Laura and her team organized a safe disclosure and transfer of all the collected data to law enforcement. Following the operation and subsequent trial, members of the International Crime Syndicate were arrested and brought to justice. The exposure of this complex conspiracy was a major achievement for law enforcement and the international community. Laura, having survived all these trials, realized that her path was full of difficulties, but each of them made her stronger and wiser. She regained her place in the company and continued to work on improving the corporate culture, making it more open and safe. Her personal life, although damaged, began to recover, and she reconnected with loved ones. Laura's story, full of drama and unexpected twists, became an important reminder of how to fight for justice and overcome obstacles despite all threats and difficulties. Her determination and courage left a deep mark and inspired many to fight for truth and honesty. After Laura exposed an international crime syndicate and restored order to the company, she hoped that she would be able to continue her work and personal life in peace. However, the peace was short-lived. Several months passed, and Laura began receiving strange messages on her social media and emails. At first, they were simple, almost harmless threats, but soon the messages became more aggressive and threatened her safety. Laura assumed that these might be residual threats from the syndicate or its allies who had not been fully arrested. However, when she began to analyze the messages, she noticed one common element: each of them mentioned a past that must be revealed. Against this backdrop, Laura began to notice that her employees were behaving strangely. One of her old colleagues, who seemed to support her efforts to improve corporate ethics, began to exhibit suspicious behavior. He was secretly passing documents and notes, which Laura was able to intercept before they fell into the wrong hands. One day, after yet another attack on her personal email and blackmail, Laura received a letter containing a CCTV recording taken in her home. The letter was accompanied by the message, "Your secrets are safe as long as you listen to what we have to say." Together with Rachel and the team, Laura decided to conduct her own investigation. They discovered that someone in the company was secretly trying to frame her by manipulating facts and creating false evidence. Since Laura was sure that the actions were aimed at her, she focused on finding out who was behind it. During their investigation, Laura and Rachel came across a series of old documents and correspondence that indicated the existence of an underground group within the company itself, not directly connected to the syndicate, but with its own interests and agenda. This group, calling itself the Legion, was involved in corruption schemes that had not been uncovered during a previous investigation. Laura suddenly learned that the Legion was planning to launch a series of fraudulent operations using her name and reputation as a cover. The group planned to fabricate evidence that would implicate Laura in illegal activities. Their plan also included an operation to spread false information about Laura to the media, which would lead to her public humiliation and loss of her job. During this time, Laura began to notice that her old colleague, who had previously seemed like a trusted confidant, was showing signs of involvement with the Legion. During a confrontation, he revealed that he had been pressured and recruited by the group to work undercover. He gave Laura information about the Legion's secret meetings and plans, allowing her to prepare for her next move. Laura and Rachel organized a complex operation to expose the group. Using information received from a former colleague and their own resources, they infiltrated the Legion's environment and collected the necessary evidence. As a result of their efforts, the information was passed on to law enforcement agencies, and a large-scale operation to detain the members of the group began. In the midst of the operation, an unexpected twist occurred. One of the leaders of the Legion, who was a key figure, turned out to be a close relative of one of the top executives of the company who had previously helped Laura. This connection explained why the fight against the group was so difficult and why the leadership was susceptible to manipulation. The operation ended with the successful exposure of the Legion, and many of its members were arrested. Laura was able to defend her reputation and restore justice. However, it became clear to her that even after successfully exposing the villains, the shadow of their actions and consequences remained long-term. Laura returned to her job with renewed determination. She focused on strengthening the company culture and creating a safety net for employees. She continued to work to make the company a place where honesty and transparency were core principles. Laura's story, full of dramatic events and unexpected turns, showed how important it is to be prepared for any challenge and maintain your determination. Her path became an inspiration to many, and her experience served as proof that fortitude and determination can overcome even the most difficult obstacles. After Laura and Rachel successfully exposed the Legion and restored their reputations, life began to return to normal. Laura began to focus on her work again, but she still felt the shadow of her past hanging over her. The constant stress and danger she faced had taken their toll, and Laura began to wonder about her future. One of the first steps she took was to create a system of anonymous channels for reporting misconduct within the company. This allowed employees to safely report possible violations and prevent potential problems. She also stepped up educational programs on corporate ethics to maintain a high level of transparency and trust within the company. But despite Laura's best efforts, she was still haunted by the idea that there was a hidden threat to her personal safety and corporate integrity. Her fears were confirmed when one of her trusted colleagues began to act strangely. He began avoiding her, and Laura noticed that he often met with mysterious people. Laura decided to conduct her own investigation. It turned out that her colleague was connected to a group of people who sought to revive the activities of the Legion. These people, using their remaining connections and resources, began to weave new schemes of corruption and manipulation, seeking to create a new underground influence in the company. During this investigation, Laura also learned that her home had been broken into again. This time, the burglars left no evidence, but one of the missing items, an old family album, was particularly disturbing. Laura began to suspect that her personal life was also part of a larger pattern of intimidation and manipulation. Amid these new threats, Laura began receiving messages with mysterious hints about her family and her past. One of the messages contained an old photograph of her father with an unknown person. Laura could not remember who it might be, but the image was clearly taken at a corporate event related to her current job. In an attempt to find out the truth, Laura turned to her father, who was retired at the time. It turned out that he had worked for the company during the period when the original Legion was active, and that he had also encountered corruption and blackmail. He said that at the time he had been involved in an investigation that had been stopped for unknown reasons. His work had been sabotage, and he had been forced to resign. Laura began to realize that her struggle was part of a larger story involving her family's past and corporate manipulation that began long before she joined the company. She found old documents and records that indicated that her father had been on a mission to expose the same network, but had been stopped by unknown forces. With this new knowledge, Laura decided to finish the job her father had failed to complete. She joined forces with Rachel and several trusted security and legal experts. Together, they developed a strategy to finally expose all elements of old and new corruption in the company. Their investigation led to shocking revelations. It turned out that some of the high-profile members of the Legion and their successors whom they had previously exposed were connected to a powerful group that exerted influence over corporations and governments around the world. This network used complex schemes to manipulate financial flows and political decisions. Ultimately, with the help of the evidence gathered and the cooperation of international law enforcement agencies, Laura and her team were able to close the case. Several high-profile criminals were arrested and their assets were confiscated. Key figures were held accountable for their actions, and the revelation became a major public event. After her ordeal, Laura found peace again and was able to focus on rebuilding her personal life and work, while her work to improve the company culture and protect employee rights remained her focus. She also took time to connect with her loved ones and rebuild the bonds that had been broken by her struggles. Laura's story ended on a high note. Her courage and determination to fight corruption not only changed her life, but also led to significant improvements in corporate practices and public life. Her experience was an important lesson in the importance of fighting for the truth, no matter the difficulties, and how perseverance and dedication can bring about long-awaited change. After Laura and her team took down an international crime syndicate and brought order to the company, they began the process of rebuilding and reforming. Laura returned to her work with renewed determination, but she still felt that the dark times were not over. One day, Laura learned that her mother, who suffered from a chronic illness, was hospitalized in critical condition. Laura was deeply worried. She knew that her mother had gone through many hardships in recent years, and this news was a heavy blow to her. Laura hurriedly left for her hometown, where her mother was. In the hospital, she was surrounded by relatives and friends, but she felt that her work required her constant presence. This created additional tension and stress, as Laura could not leave matters that required her attention. While Laura was caring for her mother, a new crisis was brewing within her company. Despite her efforts to reform and strengthen security, new cases of corruption and manipulation were uncovered, linked to an old project that had not been sufficiently vetted. It appeared that the group associated with Legion had roots in older structures within the company that may have been operating covertly. When Laura returned to the city to solve new problems, she received terrible news. Her mother had died. The tragedy devastated her. Laura was consumed by grief and, despite all her efforts to manage the situation, she could not cope with the feelings of loss and guilt. Shortly after the funeral and dealing with the emotional shock, Laura found that her own safety was at risk. She began receiving new anonymous threats that directly linked her to the company's failures. These threats not only called her professional reputation into question, but also targeted her loved ones, adding even more stress to her life. The situation became unbearable. Laura was forced to take measures to strengthen her personal security and switch to protection mode. Her team and loved ones also began to be protected. Dark days and new threats became even more unbearable when she discovered that her father, who was out of the country, was also in danger due to old connections and conflicts. To cope with the crisis, Laura decided to do everything in her power to protect her family and restore order to the company. She once again turned to Rachel and her old colleagues for help. Joining forces to combat the new threat, Laura and her team conducted another deep investigation, which revealed that old enemies of the Legion were trying to use her personal tragedies and recent losses for their own purposes. During her investigation, Laura discovered that someone within the company was secretly allied with old enemies and was manipulating the situation to frame her and ruin her efforts to reform. This betrayal was especially painful because it turned out to have come from one of her closest advisors, who had enjoyed her trust. Laura and her team fought to the last to expose and arrest everyone involved in the conspiracy. As a result of their efforts, some of the key villains were apprehended and brought to justice. However, it was a bittersweet victory. Personal losses and a permanent sense of betrayal left a deep mark. After all the trials, Laura returned to her job with new insight and determination. Although she continued to work to improve the company culture and protect her employees, her personal life remained difficult. The losses she suffered and the betrayal she faced changed her, leaving deep scars that time and the support of loved ones could not fully heal. Laura's story was a testament to the challenges of dealing with tragedy and betrayal when fighting for truth and justice. Despite the odds, her courage and determination inspired many, and her efforts to turn the company around continued to be an important legacy, even as her personal trials left an indelible mark on her life. After all that Laura had been through, she realized that her path to recovery and self-preservation would require not only effort, but also time. The traumas of losing her mother and being betrayed by a close advisor had a profound impact on her personality and professional life. Laura gradually began to look for ways to cope with grief and stress. She enrolled in therapy sessions to work through her emotions and learn how to cope with the constant pressure. Laura also began to participate in bereavement support groups, which helped her find comfort and understanding in a circle of people who had faced similar difficulties. At work, Laura decided to take a leave of absence to focus on her personal recovery. This decision caused concern among her colleagues and management, but they supported her, understanding that she needed time to recover. During this period, Laura also took part in community initiatives to support people who had experienced loss and actively worked on projects related to improving the mental health of employees. However, the world does not stand still, and the problems that Laura left behind for a while did not disappear. While she was on vacation, the company faced new problems. Its competitor, who had an interest in undermining Laura's success, began an active campaign to discredit her work and the company as a whole. Articles and publications appeared on social networks and in the media that questioned the effectiveness of the reforms and the honesty of her work. When Laura returned to work, she found herself once again fighting to restore the company's reputation. Laura and her team began working hard to counteract the negative press and discontent. They held press conferences, collaborated with journalists, and used their resources to ensure that all of the company's actions were transparent. The difficult situation brought new stresses and conflicts. Laura faced mistrust from some employees who felt that her methods and solutions were not effective enough. She also faced legal challenges from competitors who sued the company, trying to take advantage of its current difficulties. However, Laura kept moving forward. She helped create a new internal corporate social responsibility project aimed at supporting employees during difficult times and boosting morale within the company. This project was an important step in restoring trust and strengthening the corporate culture. While working to restore the company's reputation, Laura received unexpected support from former opponents. One of her old enemies, who had previously been involved with the Legion, approached her with an offer of cooperation. He admitted that his previous actions were a mistake and expressed a desire to help correct his mistakes by providing information and resources to combat current threats. This unexpected alliance allowed Laura and her team to develop new strategies and cope with pressure more effectively. Together, they began working to improve the company's public image and strengthen its position in the market. Laura was able to secure the support of public organizations and investors, which helped the company overcome financial difficulties and regain lost ground. Ultimately, despite all the challenges, Laura was able to restore and strengthen her career and the company's reputation. She also took important steps to improve the corporate environment, creating a culture of support and honesty that helped employees cope with difficulties and contributed to the development of the organization. Laura's story, filled with tragedy and struggle, showed how a person can overcome even the most difficult challenges. Her ability to cope with loss and hardship, as well as her determination and resilience in fighting for what is right, made her an example of fortitude and leadership. Laura continued to inspire many with her story of how important it is to remain resilient, not lose faith in yourself, and strive for the best, despite all obstacles. After Laura and her team managed to stabilize the company and restore its reputation, it seemed that they had started a new chapter in their life. However, behind the scenes of their success, there were invisible threats that soon turned into a new crisis. One day, Laura received a strange anonymous threatening letter containing information about her close friends and colleagues. The letter spoke of plans for revenge, affecting her personal life and work. Laura, already familiar with how dangerous such threats can turn out, decided to proceed with caution. She sought help from her security specialists and lawyers to assess the threats and take the necessary measures. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen in the company. Important documents were disappearing, and security systems were being subjected to unauthorized checks. Laura suspected that this might be related to the remaining members of the old group, who might try to regain control of the corporate structure or cause another internal crisis. Laura and her team discovered that rumors and discontent were once again spreading among employees. Some employees were being blackmailed by anonymous assailants, and internal investigations revealed that the company was once again leaking information. Laura began to suspect that there was a powerful shadow structure behind all these events, exploiting the instability for its own purposes. A tragic twist occurred in the midst of these events. One of Laura's close friends, who had supported her through difficult times, was the victim of a mysterious attack. He was found in a coma, and doctors were unable to explain how the attack had occurred. Laura was devastated and felt deep guilt that her work could have put the lives of her loved ones at risk. Together with her team, Laura began her own investigation to find out who was behind the attack. She discovered that the attack on her friend was part of a larger scheme to create chaos and pressure on her. The attackers used this tragedy to break her concentration and make her make a mistake. While Laura and her team worked to uncover the perpetrators of the attack, they found new evidence that pointed to the international connections of the group involved in the events. It turned out that the group had access to high-tech tools and resources that allowed them to penetrate security systems and manipulate the situation from behind the scenes. At the same time, Laura began receiving messages from an unknown source who claimed to know secrets of her past and had information that could ruin her life. These messages were so shocking and personal that Laura decided to meet this person to understand what was behind these threats. The meeting took place in a secluded place. The unknown man turned out to be a former member of the old group, who had been suspended and was in hiding. He told Laura that many of his former allies were not only corrupt, but also manipulators, exploiting her personal weaknesses to achieve their goals. He said that his former partners were developing a plan to completely undermine her reputation and personal life. Laura received important information that her friend was a random victim and the attack was just one of the means of pressure on her. This person also revealed the group's plans to create false accusations and falsify evidence against her and her company. With this new information, Laura and her team began proactively taking action to neutralize the threats. They established strategic partnerships with international law enforcement agencies, who provided investigative and protective assistance. Laura also stepped up security measures and began developing a plan to address the fallout from the fraud and expose the entire chain of manipulation. However, as the situation reached a critical point, a new shock came to the company. Laura learned that her former advisor, who had previously tried to help, was at the center of a new scheme. He was involved in creating falsified documents and forged evidence, which turned out to be a shocking betrayal. After a tense struggle, Laura and her team were able to finally expose the group of manipulators and ensure their arrest. However, the personal losses and emotional upheavals left an indelible mark on her life. Realizing that her path and the path of her team could not be clear-cut, Laura focused on rebuilding and strengthening her life. Laura's story ended with her being able to regain her peace despite all the trials and tragedies. She continued to work on reforms, maintaining her commitment to honesty and openness. Her ability to overcome difficulties and not lose faith in herself became her strength and an inspiration to others. Ultimately, Laura's story has left a deep mark on the lives of many. Her struggle, betrayal, and perseverance served as a reminder of the importance of persevering in difficult times and finding the strength to keep moving forward despite all obstacles. While Laura was recovering from the latest wave of crises, she managed to stabilize the situation in the company and return normal life to her own hands. However, shortly after that, she received an unexpected message that changed her life dramatically. One day, while Laura was going through her emails, she found an anonymous message that simply read, "We're not done yet." Attached to the message was a photo of her house, but it was taken recently, as if someone was following her. Laura, despite having been through a lot, felt a familiar sense of fear. She immediately reported it to her security team and law enforcement, but to her surprise, there were not enough signals of a potential threat to take immediate action. By this time, her life had seemed relatively calm, and Laura began planning a new direction for the company, focusing on sustainability and innovation. But an unexpected message left her with a worry that would not leave her alone. Trying to find out who was behind the threats, Laura decided to take a risky step. She discovered that the email had been answered by one of her old enemies, a former member of the Legion who, as she thought, had long been neutralized. This man offered to meet her and said that he had information about the group's plans that could seriously threaten her life. The meeting was set up in an old warehouse that had previously been used by the group. Laura arrived at the meeting with security and police waiting, but she was surprised to discover that the person who had suggested the meeting was her former advisor, who had been arrested for treason. He revealed that despite his involvement in the group's plans, he was forced to work under duress. The group had deceived him into believing that they were only going to target Laura and her company. In reality, their real goal was more ambitious and dangerous. They planned to launch a massive operation to manipulate and undermine security on a global level, using methods and resources that Laura had never imagined. These plans included disrupting key financial markets, hacking corporate systems, and creating global chaos that could change the economic and political landscape of the world. Laura learned that some of the remaining members of the group were attempting to establish a new front in Eastern Europe where they could hide and operate undercover. Laura and her team, realizing the scale of the threat, held an emergency meeting with international law enforcement and security agencies. They began to develop a strategy to prevent this catastrophic scenario. Laura, relying on information from a former advisor, was able to uncover new clues and discover where the group was planning their operations. The crisis prevention operation was complex and required coordination with various public and private organizations. Laura worked closely with cybersecurity experts and government agencies to block all of the group's communication channels and prevent their plans from being carried out. At the same time, despite all the security measures, Laura learned that her security had been sabotaged. One of her new guards, who seemed reliable, turned out to be a double agent working for the remaining members of the group. This discovery led to another shock, as they discovered that traitors within her team could seriously undermine their efforts. when things seemed to be spiraling out of control, Laura was able to contact her former allies and gain help from old contacts who had previously worked with her. Together, they were able to expose and neutralize the double agent and his connection to the group. The subsequent operation to eliminate the threat was difficult but successful, preventing a major crisis. Ultimately, Laura and her team were able to prevent the disaster and deploy countermeasures. However, her personal life and work were once again disrupted by deep emotional trauma and loss of trust. Laura realized that her fight was not only to protect her company, but also to preserve peace in the face of global instability. Laura's story once again highlighted her courage and determination, showing how difficult challenges and unexpected twists can test the limits of human resilience. Despite all the trials and betrayals, she was able to maintain her inner strength and dedication, helping to prevent a global crisis and protect the future. After Laura and her team were able to prevent a major threat, it took her some time to recover from the aftermath. The recent events had a profound effect on her mental and emotional state. Although she continued to work, her personal life and health were at risk due to the constant stress and pressure. Laura returned to her day job, but noticed that there were traces of internal mistrust and tension in the company. Many employees were emotionally shaken by recent threats and internal betrayal. Laura decided to focus on restoring the corporate culture and supporting employees. She initiated a program of psychological help and support for all employees, especially those affected by recent events. At the same time, Laura continued to fight the remnants of the group that was trying to exploit her company. Although they had been exposed, small groups of followers still operated in the shadows, and Laura knew she had to stay vigilant. Rebuilding the company's reputation became her primary focus. She worked to improve transparency and honesty in corporate practices to build trust among clients and partners. During her work, Laura faced a number of new challenges. The company's financial instability caused by previous crises required attention. External investors and partners began to ask questions about the company's future. Laura and her team began to attract new investors and build relationships with key partners to restore financial stability. Meanwhile, her personal life was also being tested. Constant tension and fear led to problems in her relationships with loved ones. She noticed that her friendships and close relationships were beginning to suffer from constant stress. Laura decided to seek help from relationship specialists to learn how to cope with emotional difficulties and restore personal connections. One of the key turning points in her life was an unexpected offer of cooperation from an NGO working to combat corporate corruption and support human rights. The organization offered Laura a role as an advisor and specialist in anti-corruption programs, which would allow her to use her experience to combat similar threats on a global level. Laura accepted the offer, realizing that this could be a new stage in her life. She began working on creating programs and strategies aimed at preventing corruption and supporting transparency in business. This work gave her new meaning and purpose, and helped restore her confidence in the future. As a result of all these changes and efforts, Laura was able to not only rebuild her career, but also find a new path for personal growth and satisfaction. She continued to fight for honesty and transparency in business, and worked to ensure a safe and supportive work environment for all employees. Laura's story became an example of how to cope with difficulties and trials, maintaining perseverance and dedication to the cause. Her experience showed that despite all the obstacles and betrayals, it is important to maintain faith in yourself and your principles, and to continue moving forward, despite any trials. After accepting an offer to work with an NGO, Laura's life began to change. She immersed herself in new projects and began developing programs to combat corporate corruption and support human rights. Although her work was fulfilling, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that her past was still hanging on. One day, in the middle of an important project, Laura received a strange message through a secure channel that was only used to communicate with her anti-corruption team. The message was anonymous, but it contained information that a spy had been planted in her new organization. Laura was stunned and worried. She knew that the remaining supporters of the Legion group could try to attack her through new vulnerabilities. Laura immediately began investigating, but could not find any concrete evidence of a spy. Instead, she found many small inconsistencies and suspicious behavior among employees. Internal audits began within her organization, which led to tension and a sense of mistrust among colleagues. At the same time, Laura noticed that someone had begun publishing anonymous articles and media reports that undermined her reputation and questioned her past achievements. The articles contained plausible but distorted facts that could confuse public opinion and create new pressure on her organization. One day, Laura received another letter, which contained information about an upcoming meeting, where new threats were supposed to be discussed. The meeting was to be held in a closed place in the city center. Laura decided to attend it, despite the risks. She took with her several trusted employees and security specialists. At the meeting, to her surprise, was a man from her past, Jason, a former colleague who had left the company at the start of the crisis and disappeared. He admitted that he had been suspended and deceived, and was now working undercover to find out who was behind the latest threats. Jason explained that he had been drawn to Legion's threats and manipulations, which were aimed at destroying not only her work, but the NGO itself. Jason revealed the shocking truth. Legion not only sought to destroy Laura, but planned to use her expertise and resources to undermine global anti-corruption efforts. He provided Laura with evidence that the group was in the process of preparing a major cyber attack, the purpose of which was to plant malware into the systems of global organizations and governments, causing chaos and instability. During the meeting, Laura learned of the group's plans for the coming weeks. They were planning a major action that could lead to a global catastrophe. Laura and Jason developed a countermeasure plan that included coordination with international cybersecurity services and government agencies. However, as the plan was being implemented, Laura discovered that Jason was actually working for Legion and was an undercover agent who was using her trust to sabotage the effort. This revelation came when Jason attempted to steal key data and escape to give it to the group. Laura, realizing that her new organization was under threat, initiated an emergency operation to neutralize the threat. With the help of her team and international partners, she was able to intercept Jason and prevent the cyber attack. During the operation, she discovered that Jason, although a traitor, had partial information that allowed her to expose the group's final plan. After successfully neutralizing the threat, Laura and her team began working again to rebuild and strengthen their organization. Although the experience left her deeply scarred and emotionally drained, it also taught her an important lesson about the importance of vigilance and trust in difficult times. Laura returned to focusing on improving security systems and strengthening the internal culture. She continued to work on anti-corruption programs, upholding the ideals of integrity and transparency. Laura's story became a symbol of resilience and determination in the face of constant threat, demonstrating how even the darkest times can be overcome with fortitude and teamwork. After stopping a cyber attack, Laura found her life becoming increasingly complicated. She threw herself back into her work, trying to rebuild the organization and strengthen its position, but a new threat began to form in the most unexpected places. One evening, Laura was returning home after a long day at work when she received an unexpected visit. Standing at her door was a young woman who introduced herself as a journalist and claimed to have vital information about the secret corruption schemes that were hiding within her organization, connected to her own past. The journalist presented evidence that suggested Laura might have been involved in financial fraud that she had no idea about. At first glance, the evidence seemed compelling, and Laura couldn't figure out how it related to her current activities and the organization she was now working with. The journalist said her source was an anonymous whistleblower who claimed to be part of a secretive financial consortium that used charities to launder money. The source claimed that Laura had once accidentally found herself at the center of the scheme while working for a previous company, and that Legion had used her to create the perfect distraction. Laura was shocked. Although she thought everything she had done was honest and aimed at combating corruption, she began to suspect that her opponents might have found a way to manipulate the facts and frame her. Her first reaction was to seek legal advice and an internal investigation to get to the bottom of the situation. During her own investigation, Laura discovered that many of the allegations had real roots. There were indeed questionable financial transactions at her previous company, but Laura was not part of them and did not even have access to this data. However, based on anonymous testimonies, suspicions began to be directed at her. The pressure from the public and the media increased, and Laura found herself in the middle of a huge scandal. Her reputation was again at risk, and she had to defend herself publicly, providing evidence of her innocence. She organized a press conference, where she spoke openly about her actions and how her past was used against her. During these events, Laura learned new details. Her old colleague, who had previously left the company of her own accord, was actually part of a larger scheme. She had used her connections to forge documents and manipulate to make it appear that Laura was involved in financial crimes. This colleague was working in conjunction with international criminal elements, and her goal was to create chaos around Laura to distract attention from their own crimes. Laura decided she had to act decisively. Together with a team of lawyers and detectives, she began to plot a strategy to expose and stop the conspiracy. In the course of her efforts, Laura stumbled upon a series of hidden bank accounts, complex money laundering schemes, and recruited agents who were working for her old colleague. Her investigation led to unexpected allies, former competitors and journalists who began collaborating with her to expose the criminal network. Eventually, Laura managed to gather enough evidence to initiate a global investigation. Working in collaboration with international law enforcement agencies, she was able to bring key figures to justice for financial crimes and expose the entire scheme that had tried to frame her. However, on her way to completing her investigation, Laura encountered another shocking twist. One of the masterminds behind the plots was a high-profile businessman and philanthropist who had been one of her main donors and supporters of her projects. This revelation came as a huge blow to Laura, as she realized how deeply the roots of corruption had penetrated her life. Laura navigated complex negotiations and trials that led to convictions and the restoration of her reputation. This struggle was not only a professional challenge, but also a personal journey of overcoming betrayal and rebuilding trust. In the end, Laura was able to not only clear her name, but also take her organization to a new level of transparency and honesty. She realized that her path had been full of challenges, but each time she overcame difficulties, she had become stronger. Now, Laura used her experience to help others who faced similar situations and continued to work on improving corporate ethics and social responsibility. Her story became not only a personal achievement, but also an example of how one can overcome difficulties and betrayals while maintaining faith in oneself and one's ideals. After months of struggling with internal and external threats, Laura finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Her efforts, dedication and determination led to radical changes in her life and the life of her organization. Together with her team, Laura successfully completed the investigation and was able to expose all the corrupt schemes that tried to undermine her work. Thanks to her determination and courage, she not only cleared her name, but also restored trust in her organization. With difficulty, but with pride, Laura was able to restore the company's positive reputation and convince investors and partners of its honesty and transparency. One of the most rewarding moments in her life was the recognition of her work and achievements. At a special ceremony held in her honor, Laura was awarded for her outstanding achievements in fighting corruption and restoring justice. It was a moment filled with awe and joy as she saw her work and dedication bear fruit. As an audience member and friends of Laura, you can imagine how this might have all played out. We see her in the center of the room, accepting the award with genuine humility and gratitude. She looks back at her team, who stood by her side through the tough times, and sees the pride and admiration in their eyes. The emotion overwhelms her, and in that moment, Laura knows her efforts were not in vain. The public recognition of Laura and her team not only strengthened their image, but also gave them new opportunities for growth and development. Now they have been able to initiate several successful programs and projects aimed at supporting transparency and honesty in business. These programs have become an example for other organizations and companies seeking to follow their example. Laura was also able to rebuild her personal life. She reconnected with loved ones and friends who had supported her throughout this difficult struggle. Their support and understanding became a source of strength and inspiration for her. Laura was now able to enjoy the simple pleasures of life that had previously been overshadowed by constant stress and threats. Over time, Laura and her team continued their work, but now with a new sense of confidence and optimism, they were able to create effective and innovative solutions to combat corruption and maintain integrity in business. Laura often spent time with colleagues, sharing her knowledge and experience, inspiring them to new achievements. Laura's story ended on a happy note, but her journey was filled with lessons and discoveries. She learned the importance of trusting herself and her values. No matter the challenges, her story became a symbol of fortitude and perseverance, showing that even in the darkest of times, light and hope can be found. As viewers, we can see Laura smiling, surrounded by friends, family and colleagues, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that her fight for justice and fairness has been rewarded. She was able to achieve her goals and continue to inspire others to be fair and fight against injustice. Thank you for being with us on this journey. We hope Laura's story has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. Stay tuned to learn more about how people can overcome adversity and succeed despite all odds. If you like this story and want to see more stories like this, please subscribe to our channel and like it. Your attention and support are very important to us. We would also love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on what stood out to you most about this story. What moments did you find most inspiring? What do you think was the hardest part of Laura's journey to justice? Don't forget to ask questions or share your ideas for future videos. We always love to hear from you.